morning, and thank you for joining me on the Path to Liberty. It's Monday, January 4th, 2021, and my apologies for those of you who may have tuned into the live stream today. I actually had my system crash right in the middle of it, so you are now listening to this on the archive, and you know everything's fine. There was nothing nefarious happening, but let's get to it. I think we can all agree that 2020 wasn't that awesome, especially when it comes to life, liberty, and property. And the bad news here, if we already haven't had enough, with powerful people pushing for what they call a great reset and more centralized power and control, things are not looking too pretty for the future either. And while the odds are definitely stacked against us, we've got tons of advice and actual, practical, on-the-ground strategy from people who also took on the largest empire in the history of the world, at least at that time, and they actually won. So on this episode, I'm going to go back to the founders and old revolutionaries to help us kick off the new year with 15 of the best quotes to help us get on the path to liberty. First of all, before getting to that, my name is Michael Bolden. We broadcast live every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, usually at 9:30 a.m. Pacific time from here in my home office in studio in downtown Los Angeles for the 10th Amendment Center. Our show homepage has everything you need to follow this program. All the archives for over 2.5 years. On individual episodes, I include a ton of links and references for you to read and learn more on your own time. I've got tons of source documents on this episode, for example. We have all the different platforms we're on, the video platforms like Library and YouTube and Facebook and DLive, and all the audio-only podcast editions, Apple, iHeartRadio, TuneIn, Spotify, Stitcher, Amazon, and the rest. Reviews, likes, comments, shares, all that stuff helps us spread the word. It tells the algorithm to show the program to more people. Thank you so much. You can also find our membership program there where you can support us for as little as $2 a month. We make it go a long, long way in support of the Constitution and liberty. That show homepage is 10thamendmentcenter.com/path to liberty. Again, 10thamendmentcenter.com/path to liberty, all spelled out. I couldn't be more grateful for you spending some of your time with me today. Thank you for being here, whether it's your first time or you've been here every episode since day one. Thank you so much. But let's get right to this. And I will look at the comments in the archives and reply to as many as possible a little bit later today or tomorrow. On New Year's Day, if you're a subscriber to our newsletter at 10thamendmentcenter.com/register, you got a pretty good preview of what I'm going to talk about. I sent out 10 quotes to set the foundation for the new year to establish a path to liberty. I kicked a couple of those out, added a few others, and I want to expand on that a little bit more. But I think to kick off the new year, it's good to look to Thomas Paine and hear from the article that we sent out. We have it in our power to begin the world over again. That's the title and also the quote from Paine. Here I wrote in the appendix to Common Sense, first published on January 10th, 1776. Thomas Paine wrote about what he called the birthday of a new world, with this timeless reminder that fits today and every single day of the year. And here's how Paine put it. We have it in our power to begin the world over again. And although they have it in their power to, well, they've been beginning the world over and over and over again for a long, long time, expanding power. And what we're experiencing, what they're proposing going forward is nothing new. And it's an expansion on so many things we face. Centralization of power, destruction of federalism, destruction of individual liberty, property rights, and the like. Of course, the establishment of central banking, total war, and the like. But we do have some tools. We have to first understand what the problem is that we face. Thomas Jefferson put it this way in a letter to Joseph C. Cabell in 1816. He said, "What has destroyed liberty and the rights of man in every government which has ever existed under the sun?" Every single one. He was pretty emphatic about this. "The generalizing and concentrating all cares and powers into one body." That is, centralization of power is what destroys liberty. As soon as you have total consolidation, centralization of power, it's guaranteed to destroy liberty. The path forward then has to be the other way around. George Washington, before we get to that, actually in his farewell address some years earlier, this was in 1796, he talked about the same thing. The spirit of encroachment is what he was talking about here, and that is the exercise of just a little bit of power in one branch of government where the power was actually delegated elsewhere. They're encroaching on the powers either of a power delegated to another branch or reserved to the people of the several states, as the 10th Amendment makes clear. And Washington put it this way: the spirit of encroachment tends to consolidate the powers of all the departments in one. Again, centralization and consolidation was a problem, whether it was the Jeffersonians or the Washingtonians. They tend to consolidate the powers and thus to create, whatever the form of government, a real despotism. And he put it this way: even if you like the short-term results, and in fact, a lot of people tend to do this, left and right, whatever side of the political spectrum, libertarians, if they want something done, they think that you have to go to the central government to force it on everybody, rather than recognizing that that sets the stage for bad things in the future. And here's how Washington put it: but let there be no change by usurpation. That is, exercising powers not delegated to the government, not in the Constitution. Let there be no change in that way. For though this, in one instance, may be the instrument of good, it is the customary weapon by which free governments are destroyed. He recognizes that people may see short-term good results, even long-term ones, but it is not just a path to destruction. It is seen as a weapon by which free governments are destroyed. And here's George Mason. This, a lot of people think, comes from the Virginia Declaration of Rights, and it is in there, but he actually wrote it prior to that, maybe even earlier than this. In 1775, April, remarks on annual elections for the Fairfax Independent Company. April 1775, all power was originally lodged in and consequently is derived from the people. And that means it's up to the people. The people actually hold that power. It's time for the people to exercise it. We can't count on government to do the right thing. And here's how Charles Carroll from Maryland put it in a letter to Daniel Dulany in July of 1773. He says, not a single instance, not one, can be selected. And if you see the kind of the trend here, Jefferson said every time you centralize power, every government under the sun, centralization, every time is bad. George Washington says when you have encroachment, when you have usurpation, you always end up with the destruction of liberty. And here, Carroll, after we hear from George Mason telling us the power comes from the people, he points out that you never get liberty waiting on government. He says not a single instance, not once, can be selected from our history of a law favorable to liberty obtained from government, but by the unanimous, steady, and spirited conduct of the people. So even when government does things right, if you have to look through oftentimes a decade or longer, years and years of spirited conduct by the people. Richard Henry Lee, also a great letter that he wrote to Samuel Adams, October 5th, 1787, he points out that merely choosing our leaders every few years is not the definition of freedom. And he says this: I suppose, my dear sir, that the good people of the United States in their late generous contest, he's talking about the Revolution some years earlier, contended for free government in the fullest, clearest, and strongest sense. That they had no idea of being brought under despotic rule under the notion of strong government. They weren't fighting off an empire in order to create a strong, powerful, consolidated, centralized government. He says, or in the form of elective despotism. Chains being chains, whether made of gold or iron. It doesn't matter what short-term results, who you choose, whether it's gold or iron. If you're under chains, you're under chains. And strong, centralized government is the problem we face. Abigail Adams, in a letter to her husband John, October 1774, she points out that you just can't talk. And a lot of people like to just talk. We actually have to have some action. And that doesn't mean a physical response, but there is some strategic stuff that needs to happen. And she put it this way: we have too many high-sounding words and too few actions that correspond with them. So if we're going to talk about the Constitution and liberty, we also have to act on it at some point. Of course, we have to be strategic about it. We have to recognize, as Jefferson said, here's a bonus, in a letter to the Reverend Charles Clay in 1790, that the ground of liberty is to be gained by inches. Even good people, they don't know, and I'm paraphrasing, they don't know what's best for them. It takes time for them to learn. And Abigail Adams, well, not that they don't know what's best for them. It takes time for them to learn why liberty, why freedom is good. Especially in a system where we learn so much from government-controlled schooling. So too many high-sounding words and too few actions. And that makes me think of a great quote from James Otis Jr. He was writing as Freeborn American. What a great pseudonym. April 27, 1767, he's talking about prudence. when do you hold the line? When are you smart and slow? And he says, prudence and fortitude are likewise essential. If he has not, he's talking about who to vote for example. If he has not prudence, he may needlessly irritate your enemies. If he has not fortitude, he may timidly give up your just rights. So you have to have a proper balance. You can't just always be prudent. You can't always be too aggressive. Again, it's strategic. He says there is, however, no character so dangerous to liberty as the man of prudence. And this is a quote, kind of an example that he gave. You may possibly be right, but at this juncture, it is just not prudent to insist upon. He says that's the language of artful courtiers and has done more to hurt than can well be imagined. When our rights are invaded, it is high time to throw aside prudence. That's James Otis Jr. in 1767. Patrick Henry, a great reminder that we can't, again, whether it's elections or whatever, we can't rely on people in government to do the right thing. Even if you support the person, if you count on them to do the right thing, you're guaranteed to lose liberty. And that's how Patrick Henry put it in the Virginia Ratifying Convention when he said, "Show me that age and country where the rights and liberties of the people were placed on the sole chance of their rulers being good men without a consequent loss of liberty." He says this was a mad attempt how he put it. Anytime you try to do this, every single time through history, he recognized that if you just say, well, we've got the right person in there, they're not going to exercise this power in a bad way. Or it also reminds us of kind of what George Washington was saying some years later in his farewell address. If you're just counting on people to be good with all kinds of power, you're forgetting that someone else is going to have that same power later on and will absolutely use that power against you to the detriment of your liberty, sometimes life as well. So what do we do about it? James Iredell, July of 1788 in North Carolina ratification debates, he says abuse may happen in any government. You should always expect government to try to abuse things. Now, he wasn't saying it that way, and he ended up being a Supreme Court justice he was like the first three that were appointed by George Washington, and he recognized that any government could abuse liberty. He says the only resource against usurpation is the inherent right of the people to prevent its exercise. Now, mind you, he wasn't saying there was a constitutional right. He doesn't have to spell it out in a document because our liberties do not come from, as John Dickinson once put it, do not come from charters. Our rights are natural. They are inherent. Again, this is from our inherent right to prevent the exercise of powers not delegated to government. That's usurpation. He says the people will resist if the government usurp powers not delegated to it. As long as the people believe in liberty, as long as the people recognize that the government isn't supposed to do it, then yes, that creates an environment. I wish he would have said the people should resist, but maybe he was only thinking about the people of the time, and maybe he was correct at that point. And that brings me to Thomas Jefferson. This is one that I've cited over and over and over the last few years doing this show. And this is a paraphrase from a summary view of the rights of British America written in 1774. He says a free people claim their rights. Again, they don't ask for it. They don't get permission. They aren't begging for permission slips or permits. A free people claim their rights as derived from the laws of nature and not as the gift of their chief magistrate. That's Thomas Jefferson in 1774. Samuel Adams, a few years earlier in 1771, writing as Candidus in the Boston Gazette, he pointed out a two-pronged issue that we're facing. He says the truth is all might be free if they valued freedom and defended it as they ought. So we have a two-pronged issue. You first have to value and understand freedom, understand liberty, and then on top of it, you have to defend it. So first we have to understand where it comes from, what it is, why we like it. And then also we have to have the action, the backbone, and understand how to defend it as well. We're learning how to defend it from statements like people like James Iredell, Jefferson, Madison, and others. Of course, I did an episode just last week or at the end of the year talking about James Madison's advice on how to resist federal usurpation, which he put in Federalist 46, a refusal to cooperate with officers of the Union. So this is really an issue of education and action. We have an education problem, and Benjamin Rush in 1788 put it this way: freedom can only exist in the society of knowledge. Without learning, men are incapable of knowing their rights. I would say every human being, and that's just the way they wrote it. Not that we're talking gender issues on this show at all, but freedom can only exist in a society of knowledge. Unless we understand what it is, we understand what life is, what government does, we understand history, we can't have freedom. And that's how Benjamin Rush put it. Now, the whole American Revolution really was more than just a war, more than just a battle. And that's how John Adams summed it up in this great letter to Hezekiah Niles in February of 1818. And this might be what we can call here a greater reset. They have a plan for a great reset to centralize, globalize, consolidate power in fewer and fewer hands over the whole earth. And those of us who live under the largest government in the history of the world, we have an opportunity to help decentralize that. But it takes a revolution in thought, as John Adams put it. He says, what do we mean by the American Revolution? Do we mean the American War? The revolution was effected before the war commenced. The revolution was in the minds and hearts of the people, a change in their religious sentiments of their duties and obligations. And this happened over a period of decades. Anyone who studied that history at the time, they knew. Of course, they read Mercy Otis Warren's great history of the revolution, even though Adams wasn't a fan of that and spent many years arguing back and forth with her, because she pointed out that in the time leading up to the revolution, we knew him as the Atlas of Independence. He was a great supporter of liberty. But once he got power, once he became a president, vice president, he was in office, he became what Mercy called a monarchist. He spent too many years around the kings and the leaders and the powerful and just kind of absorbed that approach. But still, here, he's pointing out that if you supported the revolution, this was a long process. And we know that whether it's all the way from before the time of the Stamp Act, the early days of James Otis writing, or Patrick Henry and Samuel Adams, John Hancock and many others, Dickinson in his response to the Townshend Acts of 1767 and the like, this was a long-term change in how people approached government, their duties and obligations. And he put it this way, Adams again, in the same letter, this radical change in the principles, opinions, sentiments, and affection of the people was the real American Revolution. And maybe that is a great example of what could be that greater reset, something that we would have towards liberty, because it's going to take a radical change in the minds of the people today to reject the notion that every problem requires a government solution. And then on top of it, every government solution has to be a centralized, far-off, consolidated, one-size-fits-all solution for the entire country and oftentimes for the entire globe. And so this is an education problem, as I keep mentioning. And Abigail Adams, in a letter of 1780 to John Adams as well, she put it this way. We've got a lot of work to do, and she put it this way. Learning is not attained by chance. People aren't going to stumble across this, especially, this is not Abigail pointing this out, but if you think about all the things that we're taught, even in private schools, they're still accredited by government. So government is approving in many ways, what people are taught over the years. From cradle to grave, we're learning. So in order to actually unlearn that stuff and learn true history, learning about liberty, we have to actually go out and seek that. She says, learning is not attained by chance. It must be sought for with ardor and attended to with diligence. So I hope you guys found this interesting. I hope it was fun to watch. I hope it was educational. Again, my apologies for those of you who originally turned in the live stream about an hour ago. I had some technical problems. My machine crashed and then wanted to install an update. That's always fun. But it looks like everything's working and I should get back to my regular live stream schedule again on Wednesday morning. But hopefully you're still enjoying this in the archives. Please continue, whether it's now or later on, whenever, please continue to smash like buttons, leave reviews on Apple and any other podcast platform, leave comments. I get tons of ideas for future episodes from your questions and your feedback. When you call me out, I make a mistake on something or I got to think about something, I often do episodes on that in the future. You can also email me at team@10thamendmentcenter.com. All of those actions, minus the email, those all, again, they trigger the platform the algorithm of the platform you watch or listen on, and it tells it to show the program to more people. And we need to reach and teach millions upon millions more in the years to come. And of course, if you want to put your financial faith behind our work, do not feel any obligation to do so, but I would be extremely grateful for any consideration you can give. It starts as little as $2 a month to become a member for the 10th Amendment Center. 10thamendmentcenter.com/members, all spelled out. I really appreciate it. I hope you had a very nice New Year's celebration. I hope you're happy, healthy, as safe as can be, and let's work to get more liberty. Let's get on that path to liberty for 2021 and beyond. Thanks for being here, and I'll see you next time on the path to liberty.